Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you love captivating stories about men transforming into women in unique and fascinating ways, then be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Now, let's jump right into today's tale.
Kristin smirked as she recalled a conversation from a few weeks back, the memory playing through her mind with vivid clarity as she applied a final coat of lipstick. The deep red shade was bold, confident, a statement of intent rather than just a cosmetic choice. She had been at her grandmother's house, continuing her magic training, tucked away in the attic that had once been forbidden to Kyle, but now served as Kristin's classroom. The afternoon had been productive. She'd mastered a particularly tricky protection charm that had left even her grandmother impressed. Remarkable progress, Gran had noted, watching as the shimmering barrier Kristin had conjured dissipated into sparkling motes of light. It took your great-aunt Eleonora 3 months to achieve that level of clarity, and she was considered a prodigy. Kristin had shrugged, though she couldn't quite hide her pleased smile. It just feels natural. Like my body already knows what to do, and my mind just needs to catch up. That's precisely how magic should feel, Gran had confirmed with an approving nod. Not forced or contrived, but an extension of yourself as natural as breathing. They had retired to the kitchen afterward, as was their custom. Gran had brewed her special blend of tea, a fragrant mixture that enhanced magical energy while calming the nerves, creating the perfect balance for continued learning. Kristin had settled into her usual chair at the kitchen table, content and pleasantly tired from the afternoon's exertions. That's when the older woman had suddenly grilled her. Those keen green eyes, so like Kristin's own, narrowing with shrewd observation. "You've been acting different, my dear," her grandmother mused, watching Kristin carefully over the rim of her teacup. Happier, more alive. There was something in her tone, a knowing lilt that immediately put Kristin on alert. Her grandmother had many talents, but subtlety had never been among them. Kristin had brushed it off, waving a hand dismissively as she reached for a cookie from the plate between them. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm the same as always." "The same as the last 2 weeks, perhaps," Gran conceded with a small smile. "But certainly not the same as when you first changed. There's a glow about you now, a certain radiance." Her grandmother simply smirked, stirring her tea with deliberate slowness, the silver spoon clinking gently against fine china in a rhythm that felt almost hypnotic. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, catching in her silver hair and giving her an almost ethereal appearance. The very picture of a wise witch regarding her protégé with ancient knowledge. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about," she teased, setting her spoon down with a decisive clink. "You've got a man in your life, don't you?" The question, so direct, so unexpected, hit Kristin like a physical force. She had been mid-sip when Gran dropped this particular bombshell, and the result was predictably disastrous. Kristin had choked on her drink, coughing as tea went down the wrong way, her eyes watering as she glared at the older woman. "Gran," she spluttered, reaching for a napkin to dab at the drops that had spilled onto her blouse. "A simple yes or no would suffice," Gran replied serenely, utterly unfazed by Kristin's reaction. "Though your response rather answers the question, doesn't it?" "I do not have a man in my life," she had quickly rebutted once she'd recovered her composure, crossing her arms defensively across her chest. The posture felt natural now, though it still occasionally struck her as strange how different the gesture felt with her new anatomy. Her grandmother raised a brow, the expression so perfectly skeptical that it could have been taught in master classes on nonverbal communication. It was a look that had intimidated local politicians, cowed rebellious teenagers, and extracted confessions from countless family members over the decades. Yet, Gran added, the single syllable loaded with knowing implication. Kristin had gone silent, her lips pressing together because, damn it, That old woman was too perceptive for her own good. Gran had always possessed an uncanny ability to read people, to see beneath surfaces, to the truths hidden below. It was a talent that had nothing to do with magic, and everything to do with a lifetime of careful observation. "I don't know what you're talking about," Kristin had finally muttered, though the denial sounded weak even to her own ears. "Of course not," Gran agreed with mock seriousness. "That's why you've checked your phone 12 times in the past hour. That's why you smile at seemingly random moments. That's why you've started wearing perfume to our lessons, despite knowing we work with herbs that overpower most sense." Kristin had blinked in surprise. "How did you—" "I'm old, dear. Not blind," Gran interrupted with a dismissive wave. "Now, are you going to tell me about him, or shall I resort to more mystical methods of extraction?" "There's nothing to tell," Kristin insisted, though she could feel the heat rising to her cheeks. "We're just colleagues. Friends, maybe." "Friends?" Gran repeated with evident disbelief. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" "Gran," Kristin had exclaimed, equal parts mortified and amused by her grandmother's persistence. "What's his name?" Gran pressed, leaning forward with unabashed curiosity. "What does he do? Is he handsome?" "He must be, to have captured your attention so thoroughly." "Daniel," Kristin had found herself answering before she could stop herself. "His name is Daniel, and he's a client, which is why nothing is happening." "A aunt?" Gran had repeated thoughtfully. "The one with the tech company. The one you mentioned meeting your first day as Kristin." Kristin had nodded reluctantly, regretting ever having shared even that much information. "Yes, that one. Quantum Innovations. It's a big account, potentially worth millions to the firm. I can't jeopardize that with complications." "Love is always a complication, dear," Gran had observed with surprising gentleness. "That doesn't make it any less worthwhile." "Who said anything about love?" Kristin had protested, the word sending a jolt of panic through her system. "It's just attraction. Chemistry. Nothing serious." Gran had eyed her skeptically. "If it's nothing serious, why are you blushing like a schoolgirl? Why does your aura practically glow when you say his name? Why have you been practicing that enhanced glamour charm I taught you? The one specifically designed to make oneself more alluring?" Caught red-handed, Kristin had slumped back in her chair with a groan. "Fine. Yes. I'm interested in him. And I think he's interested in me. But it's complicated." "Because of who you were before?" Gran had asked, her voice softening with understanding. "Partly," Kristin had admitted. "It's confusing, feeling this way about a man when I used to be one. But also because of the business relationship, because of how new everything still is, because I'm not sure I'm ready for whatever this is becoming." Gran had reached across the table, then patting Kristin's hand with surprising tenderness. "The heart doesn't concern itself with what's proper or logical or convenient. It wants what it wants, when it wants it. Fighting that is like trying to stop the tide with your bare hands, exhausting and ultimately futile." "So what am I supposed to do?" Kristin had asked, genuinely seeking guidance. "What does your instinct tell you?" Gran had countered. "Not your fear or your doubt or your overthinking mind, your true instinct." Kristin had closed her eyes briefly, searching for the answer within herself. When she opened them again, there was a new clarity in her gaze. "It tells me to stop fighting it, to see where it leads." "Then there's your answer," Gran had replied with a satisfied nod, as if she'd known all along what Kristin would conclude. "Trust yourself, dear. Your magic, your instincts, your heart, they're all connected now in ways they never could have been before." As they continued their tea, The conversation had shifted to other topics: magical theory, family gossip, plans for the upcoming solstice. But just as Kristin had thought she'd escaped further interrogation, Gran had delivered one final salvo. "Bring him to dinner sometime," she'd suggested casually, too casually. "I'd like to meet this man who's got my granddaughter checking her phone like a lovesick teenager." "We are not at the meeting family stage," Kristin had protested. "We haven't even been on a proper date yet." Yet, Gran had repeated with that knowing smile. There's that word again. And now, as she fast-forwarded back to the present, standing outside the bar where Daniel was waiting, she couldn't help but smirk to herself. The memory of her grandmother's teasing was both embarrassing and endearing, the kind of family moment that had been rare in Kyle's life, but seemed to be a regular occurrence in Kristin's. Because her grandmother had been absolutely right. Despite all Kristin's protests and denials, despite her insistence that nothing was happening between her and Daniel Carter. Here she was, heart racing with anticipation, palms slightly damp with nervousness, mind filled with thoughts decidedly unprofessional in nature. "Meddling old witch," Kristin murmured affectionately, adjusting her jacket one last time before pulling open the door to the bar. But there was no real annoyance behind the words, only a grudging acknowledgement that sometimes grandmother really did know best. As she spotted Daniel across the crowded space, his face lighting up with that particular smile he seemed to reserve just for her, Kristin felt something settle within her. A certainty, a rightness that transcended her lingering confusion about identity and desire. Whatever this was, whatever it might become, she was done fighting it. And if the warmth that spread through her chest at the sight of him was any indication, her grandmother's smug "I told you so" was going to be thoroughly earned. Tonight was the final game of their fantasy football season, and Kristin was winning, barely. The standings had fluctuated throughout the weeks, with Daniel pulling ahead after a spectacular performance by his quarterback in Week 12. Only for Kristin to reclaim the lead when her wide receiver caught 3 touchdowns in a single game the following Sunday. She had been edging out Daniel by the slimmest of margins, a mere 7.3 points separating their season totals. With only this last game left, she was on the verge of victory, but everything could change in a single play, a single pass, a single defensive stand. Fantasy football was notoriously unpredictable, the digital equivalent of building a house of cards in a breeze. "You're going down tonight, Thompson?" Daniel had texted earlier that day. "My tight end against your running back. History favors me. History is written by the victors," she'd shot back. "And I plan on doing plenty of writing tonight." Their playful trash talk had continued throughout the day, escalating with each exchange, until Kristin found herself laughing out loud at his increasingly outlandish predictions of her impending defeat. "Prepare for such a spectacular loss that they'll study it in fantasy football textbooks for generations," had been his last message. Entire chapters dedicated to the Thompson collapse of 2023. But winning the bet, that wasn't her only goal tonight. Over the past weeks, their relationship had evolved beyond the initial attraction, beyond simple flirtation. They'd shared long conversations about their childhoods, their ambitions, their disappointments. She'd learned about his difficult relationship with his father, a stern businessman who had never quite approved of Daniel's more innovative approach to entrepreneurship. He'd heard about her challenging college years, carefully edited to fit Kristin's timeline rather than Kyle's, but emotionally authentic nonetheless. Every revelation, every shared confidence, had deepened the connection between them, and every meeting, whether for coffee, dinner, or ostensibly work-related purposes, had intensified the simmering attraction that had been present since their first encounter. Last week, after a particularly lovely dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant, Daniel had walked her to her door. The moment had been perfect: moonlight, the lingering taste of tiramisu, his cologne mingling with the night air. He'd leaned in, and Kristin had been certain he was finally going to kiss her. Instead, he brushed his lips against her cheek, his hand lightly squeezing hers. "Patience," he'd murmured against her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Some things are worth waiting for." The restraint had been simultaneously gentlemanly and absolutely maddening. Kristin had stood in her doorway, watching him walk back to his car, equal parts frustrated and charmed by his insistence on taking things slow. But tonight, she had decided, the waiting was over. She wanted to give Daniel a different kind of prize. It was time to stop dancing around the undeniable chemistry between them, time to transform the potential energy of their attraction into something far more kinetic. Win or lose the fantasy football championship, she intended to claim a more significant victory. So, she dressed accordingly. Standing before her bedroom mirror, Kristin surveyed her carefully selected outfit with critical eyes. The ensemble walked a delicate line between casual and deliberately provocative. Perfect for a night of watching football that would hopefully evolve into something far more interesting. Low-rise, hip-hugging skinny jeans that accentuated every one of her curves. The premium denim clung to her thighs and rear in a way that left little to the imagination, while still maintaining a veneer of casual appropriateness. She'd spent nearly 20 minutes selecting these particular jeans from her extensive collection, trying on and discarding 3 other pairs before settling on these. The ones that made her legs look impossibly long and her backside positively criminal. A white crop tank top that stopped just below her breasts, showing off her toned midsection. The fabric was soft but substantial, the neckline dipping just low enough to hint at cleavage without being overtly revealing. It was the kind of top that invited the eye to linger, to appreciate both what was visible and what remained tantalizingly concealed. A white leather crop jacket that ended at the same height, completing the sexy, effortless look. The jacket added an edge of sophistication to what might otherwise have been too casual an outfit, the buttery leather catching the light as she moved, creating a subtle but eye-catching effect. And to top it all off, 5-inch heeled boots, just to bring her height a little closer to his. The black leather ankle boots, with their wickedly pointed toes and silver hardware details, were a statement piece on their own, transforming her posture and adding a confident swagger to her walk. "Subtle, Thompson," she murmured to her reflection, running a hand through her loose waves. "Real subtle." But subtlety wasn't the goal tonight. For weeks they'd been engaging in a delicate dance of innuendo and restraint, of heated glances followed by professional withdrawal. Tonight was about sending a clear, unmistakable signal. Game over. She applied her makeup with the same strategic precision, smoky eyes that made the green of her irises pop dramatically. A hint of blush to warm her cheeks, and a lip color that was just a shade darker than natural, giving her mouth a bitten, just-kissed appearance. A spritz of perfume at her wrists and neck, something with notes of vanilla and amber that Daniel had once commented on favorably, completed her preparations. As she gave herself one final assessment in the mirror, Kristin couldn't help but smile at the transformation. Kyle would never have recognized this confident, sensual woman as a version of himself. Her phone chimed with a text notification. "On my way. Bringing victory champagne for myself, and consolation. Bourbon for you. Hope you're ready to pay up on our wager." Kristin smirked, typing her response, confident words from a man about to experience crushing defeat. "I've already picked out which Michelin-starred restaurant in Paris you'll be taking me to." His reply came quickly, always planning ahead. An admirable quality, even when those plans are doomed to disappointment. "I'll see you soon." Tonight, she wasn't just playing to win fantasy football. She was playing to win Daniel. And as she gathered her keys and headed for the door, Kristin felt a surge of confidence that had nothing to do with her fantasy team's prospects, and everything to do with the way Daniel looked at her when he thought she wasn't noticing. Like she was a puzzle he was desperate to solve. A mystery he'd gladly spend a lifetime unraveling. The season-long competition had been fun, their wager adding spice to what was already an engaging rivalry. But tonight, Kristin was far more interested in what happened after the final whistle, when the scores were tallied, and they were left with nothing but each other and the electricity that had been building between them for months. Win or lose. Kristin Thompson was about to score the only victory that truly mattered. As she walked into the bar, she immediately felt the shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't subtle. It was like dropping a stone into a still pond, ripples of awareness expanding outward from her entrance. The Iron Kick was packed tonight, the final game of the season drawing a larger crowd than usual. The familiar sense of beer, fried food, and the underlying hum of competitive energy filled the air. The moment she stepped inside, all eyes were on her. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Drinks halted halfway to lips. Heads turned with an almost comical synchronicity. The hostess, a perky blonde who'd greeted Kristin by name for the past several visits, actually did a double take, her professional welcome faltering for a split second before she recovered. "Kristin, wow, you look Daniel's at your usual table," she managed, gesturing unnecessarily toward the back corner. The unfinished compliment hung in the air, replaced by a knowing smile that suggested she fully understood Kristin's intentions for the evening. She had met most of the regulars by now, and while she had always drawn attention, tonight was something else entirely. It wasn't just her outfit, though that was certainly part of it. It was the way she carried herself, the deliberate confidence in her stride, the slight sway of her hips, the tilt of her chin that dared anyone to look away. This wasn't just Kristin Thompson entering a sports bar. This was Kristin Thompson making an entrance. "Careful there, Thompson," she thought to herself, with internal amusement. "Your inner diva is showing." Men were staring, jaws dropping, and women were throwing jealous glances her way. She felt the combined weight of their gazes, some appreciative, some envious, all unmistakably aware of her presence. A group of guys at the bar nudged each other not so subtly, one of them actually raising his glass in a silent toast as she passed. "Damn girl." One of the bartenders, Tina, who'd been serving them for weeks, called out with a low whistle. Someone came to play tonight. Kristin acknowledged the comment with a small, knowing smile and a playful wink. Go big or go home. Right. Honey, if you go home alone, looking like that, there's no hope for the rest of us. Tina laughed, already preparing what looked like Kristin's usual order. Wow. But Kristin, she only had eyes for one man. Daniel Carter. Tots D. The rest of the bar, the other patrons, the game playing on the massive screens, all of it faded into background noise as her gaze locked onto his familiar figure. He hadn't noticed her yet, which gave her a moment to appreciate him unobserved. He looked good. He always did. Tonight he wore dark jeans and a charcoal Henley that stretched across his broad shoulders in a way that made her fingers itch to touch him. His sleeves were pushed up to reveal strong forearms, a detail that had always inexplicably fascinated her. His hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run his hands through it recently, and the effect was unfairly attractive. And when she saw him, her smirk deepened. There was something deeply satisfying about watching him unaware, about having these few seconds of advantage before the playing field leveled. It felt like having the first move in a chess match, a strategic advantage she intended to press mercilessly. He was sitting at their usual table, a beer in front of him, his phone in hand, probably checking the fantasy football scores. His expression was one of focused concentration, brows slightly furrowed as he scrolled through whatever was on his screen. She recognized that look. It was the same one he wore when analyzing design proposals or negotiating contract terms. Daniel Carter took his competition seriously, whether they involved multi-million-dollar business deals or fantasy sports leagues. But the moment he looked up and saw her, he froze. It was as if someone had hit a pause button on his entire body. His thumb stopped mid-scroll, his other hand halted with his beer glass halfway to his mouth, his posture suddenly rigid with attention. His expression went from casual indifference to absolute shock, his eyes widening slightly as he took her in. The transition was fascinating to watch, surprise giving way to appreciation, appreciation deepening into something darker, more primal. She could almost see the thoughts racing behind those blue eyes, none of them appropriate for public expression. Kristin felt a thrill run through her at his reaction. All the effort, all the careful preparation, worth it for this single moment of rendering Daniel Carter speechless. It was a heady sensation, this power, this certainty of her effect on him. As she strode over to him, she kept her movements slow, letting him absorb every inch of her outfit and the confidence radiating from her. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the floor, each step deliberate, measured. The crowd seemed to part for her, creating a clear path directly to his table. Someone whistled as she passed, a sound she would have found offensive coming from Kyle, but now recognized as a simple, if crude, acknowledgement of her impact. She ignored it, keeping her focus entirely on Daniel, whose eyes hadn't left her since the moment he spotted her. When she finally reached him, she noticed. His mouth was slightly open, as if his brain hadn't caught up yet. The consummate businessman, the smooth-talking entrepreneur, the man who always had a clever comeback ready, suddenly struck dumb by the sight of her. "Close your mouth, Carter," she thought with satisfaction. "You'll catch flies." Smirking, she reached out and gently closed his jaw with a single finger, her touch lingering on his chin for just a second longer than necessary. The contact sent a small jolt through her system, even this minimal touch charged with the electricity that had been building between them for weeks. "Cat got your tongue?" she asked, her voice deliberately lower, huskier than usual. Daniel seemed to shake himself out of his trance, a slow smile spreading across his face as he stood to greet her properly. The movement brought him close, too close for casual acquaintances, just right for whatever they were becoming. "Thompson," he said, her name somehow both a greeting and an appreciation. "You're trying to distract me from my impending victory." Underhanded tactics. His voice had that quality she'd come to recognize, the slight deepening that happened only when they were alone or in moments of particular tension. It was intimate, exclusive, a tone reserved just for her. "Is it working?" she countered, making no move to step back, enjoying the proximity, the subtle scent of his cologne, the warmth radiating from him. "Spectacularly," he admitted with refreshing honesty, his eyes making another deliberate journey from her face to her boots and back again. "Though I should warn you, it'll take more than a great outfit to save your fantasy team." "The outfit isn't for the fantasy team," Kristin replied, the bold statement hanging between them like a gauntlet thrown down. "It's for Alfta." Daniel's eyes darkened at that, the blue deepening to something closer to indigo. "After," he repeated, the single word laden with promise. "Confident about your victory, are we?" "I'm confident about something," she replied, sliding into her seat with deliberate grace, aware of how the movement showcased her figure. "The Fantasy League is just a bonus." Daniel retook his seat, his posture more alert now, more focused, like a predator scenting prey. "You're playing a dangerous game tonight, Kristin." The use of her first name, less common than his habitual Thompson, signaled a shift in the dynamics between them. This wasn't just their usual banter. This was something more deliberate, more intentional. "Good thing I like danger," she countered, reaching for the drink Tina had magically materialized at their table without being asked. "And even better that I play to win. That makes two of us." Daniel replied, his gaze never leaving hers as he raised his glass in a small toast. To victory, in all its forms. To victory, Kristin agreed, clinking her glass against his, the sound somehow sealing a pact between them. Whatever happened with the game tonight, they both knew they were playing for higher stakes than fantasy points or dinner bets. The real contest had just begun. "If you keep that open," she murmured, her voice low and seductive, "you'll attract flies." The gentle pressure of her finger lingered against his jawline for a heartbeat longer than necessary, the contact sending a subtle current between them. Her nail traced the slightest path along his skin. As she withdrew her hand, a deliberate tease that left a trail of warmth in its wake. Daniel blinked rapidly, shaking his head as if resetting his brain. The momentary shock gave way to something else: awareness, appreciation, and a healthy dose of competitive spirit rekindling in his eyes. It was fascinating to watch the transformation, like witnessing a high-performance engine roar back to life after a brief stall. Then, his lips curled into a grin. Slow, lazy, and entirely too sexy. The kind of smile that suggested he knew exactly what game she was playing, and was more than ready to match her move for move. "Well, damn," he mused, leaning back in his chair, his eyes dragging over her again with deliberate, unhurried appreciation. "If I had known this is what I'd get for losing, I would have thrown the season earlier." His gaze was tangible, a physical caress that traced the curves her outfit so deliberately showcased. There was nothing furtive or apologetic about his assessment. He looked at her with the confidence of a man who knew his attention was welcome, even invited. Kristin laughed softly, the sound low and melodic as she slid onto the stool next to him. The high-top table offered little in the way of privacy in the crowded bar, but somehow it felt like they were enclosed in their own intimate bubble. The noise and activity around them reduced to distant background. She crossed one long denim-clad leg over the other, turning slightly toward him, her body language open, inviting, and undeniably confident. The movement was calculated to draw his eye to the expanse of skin revealed between her crop top and low-rise jeans, to the sleek line of her thigh, emphasized by the tight denim, to the delicate arch of her foot in those wickedly high heels. "You sure about that?" she teased, tilting her head just enough to send her auburn waves cascading over one shoulder. "Because I'm pretty sure you hate losing." She emphasized the word hate with a slight purse of her lips, transforming the simple observation into something almost provocative. This close, she could see the subtle shifts in his expression. The slight darkening of his eyes, the nearly imperceptible tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers flexed around his glass. Daniel smirked, swirling his beer in his hand with casual deliberation. The amber liquid caught the light from the bar's overhead fixtures, creating dancing patterns across the polished wood surface between them. "Normally, yeah. But for you," his voice dropped slightly, taking on that rich, resonant quality that never failed to send a shiver down her spine. "I might make an exception." The simple statement carried layers of meaning, implications that extended far beyond their fantasy football rivalry. There was a directness to his gaze now, a clarity of intention that cut through their usual verbal sparring. Kristin arched a brow, the gesture both challenge and acknowledgement. "Good to know." She let the words hang between them, heavy with possibility. Around them, the bar continued its typical Saturday night energy, fans cheering at the massive screens, servers weaving between tables with laden trays. The persistent background melody of clinking glasses and overlapping conversations. But within their private sphere, time seemed to slow, each second stretching with anticipation. She leaned in just a little, closing the distance between them by mere inches, but somehow the subtle shift transformed the entire dynamic. Her movement brought a hint of her perfume into his space, vanilla and amber notes mingling with the leather of her jacket. and she watched with satisfaction as he inhaled slightly deeper, registering the scent. Her voice dropped to a sultry purr, pitched just low enough that he had to lean in slightly to catch her words over the bar's ambient noise. But, just so you know. She let the words hang in the air, watching as he waited, completely focused on her. His attention was absolute, unwavering, the look of a man who wouldn't miss a syllable, a breath, a nuance. Her lips curled into a mischievous smile, equal parts promise and provocation. "I'm still going to win." The declaration was delivered with such confident certainty that it carried the weight of established fact rather than mere prediction. Her green eyes held his blue ones in a gaze electric with challenge and attraction. Daniel chuckled. The sound rich and warm, as he shook his head in something between exasperation and admiration. "You really don't make things easy for me, do you?" There was no frustration in the question, only appreciation, as if her resistance, her competitive spirit, her refusal to yield, were precisely the qualities he found most compelling. Kristin smirked, reaching for her drink with deliberate grace. The movement caused her jacket to shift slightly, revealing another sliver of skin at her midriff. "Where's the fun in that?" She took a sip, maintaining eye contact over the rim of her glass, the gesture both innocent and somehow provocative. A drop of condensation slid down the side of the glass, over her finger, catching the light as it traveled. "Fun," Daniel repeated, as if testing the word. "Is that what we're having, just fun?" The question carried a weight beneath its casual delivery. A probe, perhaps, into the nature of whatever was developing between them. Was this merely an entertaining diversion, a harmless flirtation, or something with the potential for greater significance? "For now," Kristin replied, letting the qualification linger meaningfully. "Though I'm open to reclassification, depending on how the evening progresses." "Reclassification," Daniel echoed, his lips quirking upward. "Such a business-like term for what I suspect could be a decidedly unbusinesslike situation." "Professional hazard," Kristin shrugged with practiced nonchalance, though her pulse quickened at the implication. "I spend my days categorizing and defining spaces. Hard habit to break." "And how would you categorize this space?" Daniel asked, gesturing to the minimal distance between them. "This dynamic." Kristin pretended to consider the question, tilting her head slightly as if conducting a professional assessment. "Current classification. Unresolved tension with significant potential for expansion." "Expansion," Daniel repeated, his voice dropping to that lower register again. "I like the sound of that. Any preliminary designs for this expansion you'd care to share?" The double entendre was impossible to miss, the playful banter barely disguising the increasingly explicit direction of their conversation. "I never reveal my designs prematurely," Kristin countered, matching his tone. "I prefer hands-on approach. Testing the space, exploring possibilities, finding the perfect fit." Daniel's eyes darkened noticeably at her words, his composure slipping just enough to reveal the depth of his response to her deliberate provocations. "Thorough methodology," he commented, his voice slightly rougher now. "Though I've always believed the best results come from collaborative efforts." "Is that so?" Kristin leaned in closer still, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that anyone watching would have no doubt about the nature of their interaction. "And what would you bring to this particular collaboration?" "Innovation," Daniel replied without hesitation. "Adaptability. Stamina." His lips curved into that devastating half-smile. "And a willingness to go all in when the stakes are worth it." The last quality was delivered with such direct intensity that Kristin felt a flush of heat rise from her core, spreading outward until she was certain it must be visible on her skin. "High stakes indeed," she managed to reply, impressed by her own ability to maintain composure when her entire system seemed to be operating at an elevated frequency. On the screens around them, The pregame show was transitioning to kickoff. The commentators' voices rising with anticipation for the matchup that would determine countless Fantasy League championships, including their own. "Game's about to start," Daniel observed, though his eyes never left hers. "Last chance to revise your prediction. Any second thoughts about your impending victory?" Kristin's smile was pure confidence as she raised her glass in a small toast. "Not a single one. Though I think we both know tonight's real victory won't be determined by what happens on that screen." Daniel clinked his glass against hers, the sound somehow sealing a pact between them. "On that point, Thompson, we are in complete agreement." As the kickoff soared through the air on a dozen screens around the bar, neither of them bothered to look up. The game had begun, but it wasn't the one that truly held their attention.